So I want to try and step into a beautifully important, wildly gorgeous topic, right? Which is prayer. But I want to add a dimension to prayer that we've never talked about. Okay, everyone with us? Ready to go? We're ready to go. I want to add something that's going to bring us into prayer. It's going to bring us into prayer, and it's going to explain. And I'm going to ask Krista or Kirsten if we can find all of the words for the Leonard Cohen Hallelujah, so we can kind of see the whole. Because there's a couple of pieces that are really important, right? Are really important that we're going to try and explain now, and that is prayer as protest. Okay, prayer as protest. Right? Prayer as protest. Does everyone get that? Prayer as protest. Right? It's like, right? Not prayer as, right? We talked about 7 movements of prayer last week. I'm going to talk about prayer as protest. And protest happens in many ways. Protest happens through humor, through laughter, and protest happens through demand, but there's a revolution in prayer. And protest, right? When we're protesting, there's a protest that challenges divinity. Right? We don't only come to prayer as supplicants, asking, pleading, but in the interior sciences, prayer itself is a form of protest. And in the hidden lineages of the great traditions, not the superficial stuff that's caricatured as the great traditions. My colleague Sam Harris wrote a book called The End of Faith, in which essentially he caricatures accurately, but it's a caricature of the exterior superficial dimensions, the shadows of the great traditions, but actually misses, right, the depth of the interior sciences that the great traditions held. And in the great traditions, there were 2 forms of protest. When I actually challenge God, I challenge God as part of my revolution. I both partner with the divine, I'm divinity's evolutionary partner, and I'm protesting. So I'm partner and protest at the same time. So one form of protest, and these are deeply related, is laughter. So I'll tell you a joke. Anyone up for a joke? But it's a deep joke. Okay, we ready? We're ready? Okay, so here we go. So this righteous man dies, and he's this super righteous, like wild, deep guy, right? And he's so righteous, he's so good, he's such a great master that he literally goes right to the highest heaven, goes to the highest heaven. And there he is before God. And so God says, well, so what can I do for you? He says, well, can I tell you a joke? And God says, a joke? Like no one had ever said that to God. So God says, sure, I guess tell me a joke. So this righteous man tells God a Holocaust joke. Like it's a joke about the Holocaust, like, right? Tells God a Holocaust joke. And God says, I don't get it. I just don't get it. And the guy says to God, you had to be there. You had to be there. Wow. Who got that? Who got that? Who got that, right? Oh my God. Who got that? Who got that? Who got that? If you got that, if you got it right, yes. Did you get it? Like, wow. And then did you get how many layers there is to this? Did you get how many layers? Right? God doesn't get the Holocaust joke. And so the master says to God, you had to be there. Wow. You had to be there. Now, get the paradox in this. This is deep, and we're deep in this together here. Right? We're in this revolution. We're going to add a piece. So the caricature of religion that Sam Harris or his whole gang, Chris Hitchens and Yuval Harari and Richard Dawkins, the whole, right? They caricature religion. Religion has many shadows, but spirit is much more subtle. And the great traditions, right, at their best, had an enormous amount of subtlety that we need to actually transcend and include. We need to create a new language of spirit. We need to create new subversive vocabularies that are first principles. And we need to weave together pre-modern, modern, and postmodern into a new larger whole. But we can't just throw out pre-modernity. They didn't just get it wrong. The great traditions had and still have something wildly important, right? Which is this notion of paradox. And whenever you've had a mystical experience, which means you've had a genuine direct access and experience of the absolute truth and goodness of spirit and the self-evident goodness of reality itself, right? And the truth of love and the truth of the value of goodness, truth, and beauty. Whenever you have a mystical experience, one of the characteristics of a mystical experience is, anybody? Paradox. It's paradox, right? It's paradox. Did everyone get paradox? Everyone get the word paradox? Okay. So it's paradoxical. How could you use the word fuck in the middle of a holy, right, conversation? And how could fuck be holy? Paradoxical. We're not going to talk about it. It's not our topic, but it's paradox. What's the difference between a paradox and a contradiction? Anybody? What's the difference between a paradox and a contradiction? In a contradiction, A is the opposite of B, and you can't resolve them. It's either one's right or the other's right. In a paradox, we hold both of them together. Does that make sense, everybody? Can you hold that? And in a paradox, we hold both of them together, right? Does that make sense? We got that? Right? There's no split, right? We're holding it together. So in this joke we just told, right, both are true at a higher level of consciousness, right? So that's a paradox. So I'll just give you an example. I'll give you an example. So how many people who are here, and it's a great example, right? If it works for you, okay? We good, everybody? So let's do this. So here's paradox. How many people who are here decided, made a decision? I could have done 10 things this morning, but I made a decision to be here. How many people feel like, wow, I made that decision? I made a decision, right? I could have done a lot of different things. I made a decision to be right. I didn't have to be here, but I decided to be here. And that's true. That's obviously, there's a great truth to that. But here's another truth. Another truth is you didn't decide at all, right? You were being lived. It's deeper than that, David, right? You were being lived by reality. This is yours to do. It's the place where you need to be. And all of your life and all of my life brought us to be together in this revolution this morning, right? And it's what I like to call choicelessness, right? It decided me. So on the one hand, I decided, right? Obviously, I decided, right? I mean, obviously, I had many choices. I'm an autonomous being. I'm a separate self with free will, and I made a decision. But at some deeper level, the reason we know each other, the reason we're together, the reason we're in this revolution, the reason we're the ones making this commitment, the reason we're taking responsibility is because something larger than us is living us, and it's beyond choice. We actually have no choice. We have to do this. We can't walk away. And even when we're exhausted and we feel like, oh my God, let's just right? But there's this larger mystery in which we're beyond choice. Can you feel that? How many people can feel that? Now, is this a kind? How many? I'm gonna just check in. Who can feel it? Right? That's a first-person moment of enlightenment, right? On the one hand, there's a contradiction. What's the contradiction? Well, either I chose to be here or I didn't choose to be here. One way or the other. You can't have both. Right? That's the level of contradiction. But then in a mystical experience, I reach a deeper level of consciousness where I'm actually holding, right, contradiction, right? I chose and I didn't choose. And if you find the most important movements in your life, beloved Oriana, you actually begin, right, friend, right, Mosa, you begin to realize every place I've been, I needed to be. You get that? And it couldn't have been any different. Okay, that's paradox. So in this joke, what is this joke holding? And that's what laughter does. Laughter holds paradox. And this is big. This is big, it's deep, it's a deep principle, right? We generally think of there being, okay, we think of there being 5 senses in reality, 5 senses. But actually in the first principles of the interior sciences, there are 12 senses. And what is a sense? What's a sense? A sense gives you access to a dimension of reality that the other sense doesn't give you. So fragrance, smell tells me something about reality, right? Touch tells me something else about reality, right? Auditory, I can hear, tells me something else. It gives me access to a different layer of reality. Seeing gives me access to a different layer of reality. Tasting, right? The 5 senses. But there are more than 5 senses. We actually have other ways of accessing reality. So the 12th sense, it's called the 12th sense, in a mystical book about 100 years before the Common Era called the Book of Creation. It's got about 450 words. It's one of the most important texts ever written. It talks about these 12 senses, and the highest of the 12 is laughter. Wow. right? So laughter, right, is a faculty that allows me to access reality in a way that nothing else does. We together so far? We good? Okay. So we just told a joke. Now, what's the paradox in this joke? Right? Everyone get the joke has so many levels, right? It's so subtle. It's so good. What's the paradox in the joke? Anybody? Right? He's there. He's this righteous man. He's a master, right? He ascends to the highest heaven, right? He's talking to God, right? And then he tells him a joke, a Holocaust joke, which is, ultimately not cool. Holocaust jokes are not cool. They're not funny. I have one friend who I'm very close to. I won't say his name. He's a well-known person who once told me a Holocaust joke. And I said, if you ever do that again, I'm never talking to you again. Some things you don't joke about, right? But he's there before the divine and he decides, okay, there's nothing else I can do. I got to tell a joke. And then God doesn't get it. He says to God, you had to be there. Right? So what's the joke about? The joke is about evil. It's about how can there be infinitely good God and a boy hanging on the gallows, right, in Auschwitz every day, right, and 12,000 people gassed a day in 1944. How can those hold together? But yet, on the inside, we don't explain suffering. We never do. We can never explain suffering. We can't. Anyone who tells you they can explain suffering, New Age, right? New Age, 1,000 explanations in the New Age to suffering. Anyone who tells you they're going to explain to you suffering, they're going to work out the contradiction between infinite goodness and human suffering, walk away. Don't trust them, walk away. You can't explain suffering. But you can actually, when you're in the relationship, when you're on the inside of the inside, your heart's ripped open, you can actually be speaking to God directly and say you had to be there. Now that makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. It's a paradox. That's mystical realization. Can you hear that, everybody? I mean, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous, right? Did I just lose everyone? That's super subtle. That's like a super advanced, right, mystical understanding. How many people got it? I have if you got it, just say yes. If you don't, ask a question about it, okay? But it's gorgeous. It's subtle. It's everything. It's this joke about a master, right, who goes to God and said, right, you had to be there. Wow. Wow, right? So there's a dimension of prayer, which is protest. Protest, right? Protest, right? God, where are you? Right? Where are you? Where are you? Right? One of my favorite prayers, it's a very subtle prayer, right? Is Mimkumcha Malkeinu Tofia. God, from your place, appear. V'timlo chalenu, right? And be the king. Ki mechakim anachnu lach, because we're waiting for you. Matai, when will you come already? Can you feel that? Right? There's a protest in that we're waiting for you. Where are you? Right? Wow. Wow. I'll give you another prayer. It's a famous prayer that many people have written major essays about. You may have heard about it. You may not have. It's called the Kaddish prayer. Kaddish. Can everyone write that in the chat box? Is that okay? Kaddish. Right? How many people have never heard of Kaddish? Give me a no if you've never heard of it. I'm sure most people haven't. But if you've never heard of it, right? No. Fantastic. Great. So that's awesome. Thank you. No, so Kaddish is a prayer. It's a prayer in Aramaic, which is said when a person has died. So when a person dies, we say the Kaddish prayer. And it's Aramaic. It's all Aramaic. And it's a mystical prayer. The only thing is, the Kaddish prayer doesn't say anything about death. And in Raquel, look up Kaddish, and you'll see some gorgeous essays. Leon Wiesteler, I can never pronounce his name, wrote a couple of gorgeous essays on Kaddish. Right? It's an incredible, but Kaddish is this prayer you say when a person dies, but it doesn't talk about death. And the words of the prayer are Yitkadel v'yitkadesh shemei rabba. Magnified and exalted will be your name in the future. Oh, isn't God's name magnified and exalted and perfect right now? And why is it in the future? Because death is in some sense a violation of divinity. Death is painful. Death rips our hearts out. And yes, there's life beyond death. And yes, there's continuity of consciousness, but death itself in some profound way contradicts divinity, right? And I've got to hold the contradiction and turn it into paradox. That's what prayer does. Can you feel that? Right? I hold the contradiction, I turn it into paradox. And so the prayer is, it's in Aramaic, and it's Yitgadel v'Yitkadesh Shemei Rabba, in the future, God. In the future, right? Your name's going to be magnified. But now in the face of death, there's something empty about your name. So God, right? God, show up, be here, right? Turn your silence of presence into a full presence of speech, right? We demand your partnership. So prayer's audacious, right? Prayer's audacious. Can everyone feel this? Right? There's this new dimension of prayer. Let's take it deeper. Can we take it deeper? Can we take it one step deeper? We okay? Can we okay? Okay, let's go deeper. Let's go even deeper in. I want to get this dimension of prayer. So once a year in the lineage tradition, let's say, of Hebrew wisdom, out of which Christianity emerged and Islam emerged, right? And it had enormous impact on reality. There's a day of the year, which is called Yom Kippur. It's the Day of Atonement. And that's the day where everyone comes and prays, right? And people pray for hours and hours and hours, 25-hour kind of prayer fest, right? It's this ecstatic prayer fest for 25 hours of complete joy, okay? Complete joy. So again, this has nothing to do, this doesn't need to be your tradition. I'm borrowing this from the Hebrew lineage tradition to model something, okay? So that doesn't matter whether this is your tradition or not your tradition, that's not the point. This is a universal principle, okay? So everyone's with us, okay? So people will come and they're completely brokenhearted right, on Yom Kippur, but they know that actually they can meet the infinite love of reality. And literally, and this is one of the most profound ideas in the world, the reason it's complete joy, because you know that you're already forgiven. You come to Yom Kippur, and you can actually get on Yom Kippur underneath the space-time continuum and recommit your life to your unique self. And simply by recommitting your life and regretting any past, right? Oriana, right? I regret any past mistake that any of us have made with true regret and true commitment into the future, right? There's a mystical formula that literally underneath the space-time continuum actually obliterates the past. It doesn't exist anymore. You've actually reconfigured the past, and that's the joy, right? The joy is the ability to reconfigure the past, and that's a different conversation. It's a very deep idea. What does it mean to get underneath the space-time continuum? But it's not just a woo-woo idea. It's a very profound idea in physics now. We're actually realizing the space-time continuum is a dimension of reality, but that we can actually go deeper. And consciousness is underneath the space-time continuum. That's what Yom Kippur is about. Okay, everyone with me so far? Because that's just the context. With that context, let's dive in. Okay, and then we're going to pray. This is our context for prayer today. So with that context, I'll just tell you a short story. Here's the story. So it's Yom Kippur Eve, and everyone's gathered at the prayer hall of the great Hasidic master named Levi Isaac of Berdichev. And if you know about Foucault and Derrida particularly, the great postmodern deconstructive thinker, he loved Levi Isaac of Berdichev and actually writes about him. So Levi Isaac of Berdichev is the name of his town, right? He's gathering, right, to pray. And it's packed, everyone's there and they're in full joy. And they're there ready to offer up their prayers. And then, and now stay with me, in the middle, in walks this man who everyone knows never comes to the prayer hall. And he pushes his way through and he goes to the front and he stands by the Holy Ark and he grabs the curtain and he mumbles like a few sentences. Then he says, "I'm done. Let me know if we have a deal," and walks out. And everyone wants to grab him. They're furious with him. I mean, they're utterly crazy furious with him. Does everyone get this? They're completely furious with him. Okay? All right, now stay close, okay? Stay close. Peter, stand with us. Ultimately, death doesn't contradict divinity, but you got to hold the contradiction for a moment and move it into paradox. But stay inside, everyone, okay? Let's stay inside. Let's stay in the story together. Okay, so this man's now walked out, and everyone's trying to grab him to stop him, and he's kind of violated the sanctity of the day, and they can't understand. You know the word chutzpah? Anyone's got the word chutzpah? Put it in the chat box. Chutzpah, Chutzpah, chutzpah meaning arrogance, right? And what kind of arrogance is this? Right? How can he walk in on the holiest day of the year and pray these few sentences and then say, do we have a deal? Whatever that meant, and walk out. And so people are furious with him. And 25 hours later, at the end of the holy day, right, the master, the great master Levi Isaac of Berdichev says, get me that man. I desperately need to talk to him. And everyone's like, why does he want to talk to this arrogant man who came in and violated the sanctity of the day? And so they go and find him. And they bring him before Levi Isaac. And friends, open your hearts. Let's open our hearts together. Levi Isaac says to this man, he says, you've got to be my teacher. I've never seen anyone pray with the confidence that you prayed. You must tell me your prayer. You must tell me your prayer. Wow. And the man says to Levi Isaac, he says, I'll tell you my prayer. It's very simple. I said to God, I've made some mistakes this year. There were a couple of weights and measures I didn't do exactly right. And there were times I got angry that I should have, and I got a little contracted, and I'm sorry for that. And I didn't always get to fulfill all of the rituals. And there's times I should have been just a tad sweeter. And God, I want your forgiveness. But God, you've had a terrible year. The woman who lives 2 doors down from me, her husband, right, died in the middle of the night, and she's left with 4 children. Right, and 2 blocks over, right, there's the woman who lives by herself, right, with 3 children, and one of them is sick, and she can barely put food on the table, and she's racked with anxiety every day. And this man went through the list of people suffering intensely in Berdichev. And he says, God, you've had a bad year, but you know what? I'm willing to work with you. Let's make a deal. You forgive me, and I'll forgive you. Do we have a deal? And he walked out. Wow. 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 Wow, can you hear that? And Levi Isaac looks in his eyes and he says, never has a more holy prayer ever been prayed. But my friend, he says with tears in his eyes, you made only one mistake. You prayed only for yourself and not for the whole world. Had you prayed for the whole world would have been instantly liberated in one moment. Can you hear that, friends? That's prayer as protest. That's demanding something from God. Wow. Prayer as protest. It's a complete paradox. But if you listen deeply to the holy and the broken hallelujah, you'll actually feel the protest. Hallelujah is a joke, the word. Hallelujah means, as we've shared here before, but now you'll get the paradox in it. Hallelujah means, on the one hand, pristine praise of the perfect God. But hallelujah also means, right, drunken, wild laughter, revelry, and the great joke. Right? So I come to God in the laughter and in my broken hallelujah. And even though it all went wrong, I stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my lips but hallelujah. So hallelujah is, on the one hand, right, we fall into the arms of the divinity who holds us in every second, the second person of cosmos. The first principle is the personhood of cosmos. God is third person, the laws of physics. First person, the God who lives in me, but the personhood of cosmos, the infinity of intimacy. But in that intimacy, there's protest. In a genuine intimacy, there's protest, right? No, God, it can't be this way. And God, we're so intimate. God, I love you so madly. I can't allow for this pandemic. And God, you've got to heal it. And God, you've got to fix it. And yes, God, we're going to be revolutionaries. And yes, we're going to be activists. And yes, we're going to evolve the source code. And yes, we're going to articulate the new first principles. But you've got to be there with us. And we demand your presence. We demand that you hold our hands. We demand that you heal the world. We demand that you partner with us. And we can't do it without you, and you can't do it without us. And we are protesting, right, every tear. And we're protesting every person who can't breathe. And God, we are with you one breath, and let your name be magnified and exalted, because in this moment right now, you are absent. God, you didn't get the joke because you weren't there. Be there, God. And of course, in that moment of the void, we know that the silence is a silence of presence. We know that as we scream those words, right, divinity is speaking through us. And in God is more present in the apparent absence than he or she, it, the infinity of intimacy ever was, right? It's not a silence of absence, right? It's a silence of presence. And the voice of protest is the voice of the divine, speaking through us, right? And evil is a failure of intimacy. And it's only when we restore the intimacy in the act of protest that we can actually be revolutionaries. So we're not revolutionaries in the Marxist sense, which we're stepping away from the divine. We're revolutionaries in this new sense, in which actually our lives are protest. We offer our lives as protest, prayer as protest, prayer as holy audacity, prayer as, God, let's make a deal. And God, this is a deal you can't refuse. Because we need you and you need us. And the time is now. And ad matai, until when? Until when? Until when? Ad matai, until when? Right? It's got to end now. Right? We protest. And you know what? You know what divinity does when we protest? Smiles. God laughs. And God gets the joke. And we get the joke together. And in the power of our laughter together, we move to transform reality. So let's step inside, right, to the holy and the broken hallelujah. And then we're going to come together. We're going to pray for just a couple minutes. We're going to offer up prayers, but we're going to find this new chord in this symphony of the first principle of prayer. Prayer as protest. Let's go all the way inside, right? The holy, right, and the broken hallelujah. Protest itself. Leonard Cohen.
Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David played, and it pleased the Lord.
Together, all of us, all over the world.
Really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah. So I tried to touch. I've told the truth. I didn't come to fool you. And even